In the book of Esther, the first chapter, in verse 10 through 22, it tells us that on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbonah, Bigtha, Agatha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus, the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king for the crown of royal, with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, his anger burned within him. Then the king said unto the wise men which knew the times, so was the king's manner toward all that knew the law and judgment. And the next unto him was Karshena, and Shethar, and Abnathah, Tarshish, Meaz, Mirasena, and Mimikan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, which sat first in the kingdom. What shall we do with the queen Vashti according to law, because she hath not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? And Mimikan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath done not wrong to the king only, but also to the princes, to all the people that are in the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. The king also, Ahasuerus, commanded Vashti the queen to be brought before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say today unto all the king's princes which have heard unto the deed of the queen. Thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. If it please the king, let there go forth a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give their husbands honor, both great and small. I think we're all familiar with that account, where the king had sought to bring the queen before the crowd there, and she refused. And as a result, this law was written. Now we know that in this, we see the providence of God as it works to bring about the time at which Esther would be brought forth, as Mordecai, her uncle, said unto her, for such a time as this. And it resulted in the salvation of the Jewish nation, which Haman had sought to bring about things that would destroy all of the Jews in that land. But God's plan continued to work through, even in the face of this evil that the king brought forth. God used that to bring about good. And as you read the Old Testament, you realize so many times you see the things of God in a broader light. You see how God is one who set forth in Genesis 3 that there would come a time which that seed, a woman, would come forth. And in the fullness of time it occurred. But the whole of the Old Testament is filled with so many lessons of God's workings and the means by which we can look, we can study, we can examine ourselves and learn lessons from the Old. Though we are, Colossians, the 3rd chapter, and verse 17, to do all by the authority of Christ. That is the new covenant, Matthew 28, 18 through 20. We realize that the Old Testament is there for our learning, and this section is one which we can learn so many great lessons. The Apostle Paul said in Romans, the 15th chapter, in verse 4, that it is there that we can have hope. In 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, so we can learn things not to do. And this entails some of both of those things. So let's look at this, and I've got about 4 lessons that we can learn out of this incident with the queen who is rejected. We're not going to look to Esther. We're going to look to Vashti and the events surrounding her. And I think it can help each of us to learn some lessons that helps us to do better in this life and to prepare us for the life to come. Now, as we look at this, the first lesson that I want us to see is that proper morals, they don't bend. You look again in verses 10 through 12, and the king is, and you look at the situation. He's had about a 6-month drunken brawl, is about the best description of it. And he now desires to bring his queen. Come here and let everybody look at you. Well, there are different ideas on what he desired. You find that the Mishra, which was a Jewish commentary, it states that whenever it says come before with her crown, that's all she was going to have. That he wanted to parade her and show her naked before the crowd that was there. Others say, well, no, she was still in her royal attire. But the fact is, during that time, it was shameful for the women. You find that she had a gathering of women within her courts, and the king had his. And the women, especially those who were of the king, they were not out and about. They were not to be looked upon and gazed upon. So whatever way you want to look at it, there was a moral dilemma that Vashti faced. Should I go at the bidding of the king and do what he asked for me? Well, I look at that. I can't help but think, go forward to the New Testament, to Matthew the 14th chapter and Mark the 6th chapter, where Herod is so desirous of his stepdaughter. Well, not really, because he wasn't really married, but the one whom he thought was his wife had a daughter, and so the daughter of Herodias, Herod says, bring her forward and let me dance. Let her dance before me. I'll give anything she wants. And of course, she desired John the Baptizer's head on a charger. Well, she didn't come out with a hula hoop. You can just about be assured that what she did was ungodly actions. You can see the lust in his eyes. And I think in the king, you can see that same thing. You look and you see the situation that she was being asked into. The king had been since 6 months drinking. And all of his cohorts around him. He had been bragging about all that he had. And then he says, wait till you see this. Come on, Vashti. Vashti stands forth as an example of those who look and determine that I know what is right and I know what is wrong. And whether it be the king, whether it be your husband, whether it be your boss, whether it be some governmental power, you do not do that which is immoral. She refused to come. Acts the 5th chapter and verse 29, the apostles were charged, preach no more in this name. Well, they knew what was right. They were commanded to preach. And they said, we must obey God rather than man. You do what you want to us, but we're going to do that which is right. Romans the 14th chapter, oftentimes abused passage. It's abused to teach something that's true, but it's not in that passage. Romans the 14th chapter talks about those things that are neither right nor wrong, eating of meat and such as that. And the note in Romans 14 verse 23, whatsoever not of faith is sin. In other words, if I cannot do it with a clear conscience, don't do it. Vashti was one who stood up and she says, I know what is right, I know what is wrong. If I do this, it's going to violate the king's laws itself that she shouldn't be gazed upon, but it would violate the laws of morality that she seemed to have had a consciousness of. And she said no. She was not going to do that, no matter who asked her, no matter who desired it. You look at her and you find a person who is courageous. And in this world, there are so many things that pull us to change. This morning in class, Ethan was talking about the idea that the church, in some people's eyes, changes. The laws governing it, the laws governing the individuals that make it up, since the people are the church. These things change with time. Well, no, they don't. Every one of us can look, and there are things that are cultural, we understand that, but there are things that are just flat out immoral, they're wrong, and you don't do them no matter what. And it's courageous to stand up and choose the right. That's why, Romans the 12th chapter, we're not to be conformed to this world. Some people say, well, if I don't dress like this and expose so much of my body, then everybody's going to think I'm some kind of prude or something. I don't know what the word is used now. But, do we act upon what other people think? Or do we act upon what God has said, the decorum we are to have? You take one passage over in the book of 1 Peter, the 3rd chapter, in verse 1 through 5. It talks about the sad situation of a wife who is married to an unbeliever and such. But he says, likewise, you wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they may without the word be won by the conversation of their wives, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear. In other words, this chaste that is such that is pure. It's not going to be the woman says, well, I'll do anything you want if you just, come be baptized. I've known actually people that just about go to that degree. But he says the way of having influence, a proper influence upon this one, is to have that chaste conversation coupled with fear. The adorning is not the outward adorning, the plaiting of hair, the wearing of gold, or the putting on of apparel. He says it's not what you put outwardly. In other words, as I prepare myself to go out in public, what am I doing? Well, I'm looking, and I know that y'all can't understand it as handsome as I am. But I don't want my clothing to distract from who I am. I don't want to distract from the lesson I give. You say, well, I'm not a preacher. Well, Matthew 5:16, you let your light shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Is that which I am wearing, is that which I'm showing outwardly? Is it, if I wear this, everybody's going to say, woohoo, look at Jack. He says, rather, let it be the hidden man of the heart, in which is not corruptible, even the ornament of meek and quiet spirit that is inside of God, a great price. And then he says, in times past, holy women of God, they trusted in God. You see, they didn't trust in themselves. They trusted in God, and that's how they adorned themselves. Vashti was concerned. I have no doubt that she was a fair woman to look on. But she said, that's not the way I want people to look at me. I'm not going to do it. How many times today we see where people, it's in the news a lot, how men, and sometimes women, have taken advantage of others. Well, sometimes the women, the men, have acted in such a way to appeal in that way, and that doesn't make it right on the part of another. It is sinful to have your heart, your eyes full of adultery. But we don't want to prompt that. We don't want to cause others to stumble. We want them to see us for who we are. That we are godly individuals. Look attractive. That's great. But have morals. And they don't change with the time. Culturally, things change. Type of dress changes. But morality, what we do to attract, to impress others, does not change. As children of God, we want them to see godliness in everything that comes from us, whether it be dress, speech, whatever. Vashti was courageous. She said, I'm not going to be conformed to this man. He's king, I'm queen. I'm not going to do it. That's courage. And then you find the value of alcohol. Here I could put maybe a few other things today. You can go down to the green distribution. We got medical marijuana now. And it's amazing how many illnesses they cure. I think I got my toe. I don't know whether it's bursitis in a joint. Here, I give you a prescription. But the fact is, drugs, and alcohol is just a drug, but these drugs, what they do is they mask what I ought to be. We talked about being moral, having character that supersedes the expectations of the world, the desires of the world. Well, alcohol is pretty plain. Now, you look, the situation, you think about this. Why would any man ask his queen in front of a drunken group, come on, come here and look and see what I have? He'd spent 6 months showing them the fortunes he had amassed in his kingdom. You see all that I own. You see all that I'm in control of. And then finally, after that feast was over, he said, we're going to bring others in even, and wait till you see this one. Who would do such an ungodly thing? Well, maybe if he had been in his right mind, he wouldn't have. But you know what alcohol does? You know, I listen to songs at times and listen to country and western type songs. And there's one, don't know the rest of the song, but I remember I heard that, whoa, somebody telling the truth in this song. Tequila makes her clothes fall off. Heard that? If you hadn't heard the song, you know it's there. Why is it that people have drugs to give to people in order that they can have their way immorally with them? Why is it that people, if we're going to go on a date, come on, let's have a drink? Because it brings down the morals. It breaks down the inhibitions that we have. And people say, well, you know, I'm not going to drink too much. Are you kidding? Whenever you take that one drink, you started that wall trembling down. How far do you want it down? You look and you find that God demonstrates over and over the value of alcohol. The king knew it. You know, here it is. Hey, I've drunk everything, and hey, let's get out more. Let everybody drink what they want. Come on, Vashti. Show them what you got. That's no surprise if you looked in the scriptures. You know the first time you're introduced to the beverage alcohol in the Bible? Now people say, well, wine is always, no. You got to look in the context. Wine is in the cluster in Isaiah, so wine comes out of a wine press. Nothing alcoholic there, but it can be made alcoholic. Genesis, the 6th chapter, Noah was keeper of the vineyard. He made wine. It was alcoholic. And he's laying naked on his bed. And his son finds him that way. You think Noah would have done that? The one who was a preacher of righteousness, who sought to tell people to turn from such actions? No, but alcohol took away who he was. And he became as the world that he had condemned in his preaching. You look and you find in the book of Leviticus, the 10th chapter, in verse 1 and 2, and I think Aaron's going to get over here. I don't know where Aaron is, but he's going to get over there next Bible class. Talk about Nadab and Abihu. Well, they offered strange fire. I don't know whether he's going to go on and make a connection. Everybody's familiar with Nadab and Abihu. Are you familiar with verses 8 through 10? I don't think it's any accident that right in that context, in Leviticus, the 10th chapter, in verse 8, he said, do not drink wine nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when you go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest you die. What's the problem with drinking alcohol? He says, if you don't do that, if you do that, he says, you don't drink. Why? So that you may put a difference between holy and unholy, between clean and unclean, that you may teach the children of Israel the statutes which the Lord has spoken unto them by the hand of Moses. In other words, you do not have the mental faculty, if you drink, to do what's expected of you. Somebody says, well, I'm not a priest. Better go to 1 Peter 2, verse 9. If you're a child of God, you're a priest. Matthew 28, 18, 20. You have the opportunity, the command to teach others. 1 Thessalonians, the 5th chapter. You have the obligation to discern between good and evil, right and wrong. So I'm going to drink alcohol? Even though God says, you lose that ability whenever you drink. Well, I think that was likely the problem that I see in Nadab and Abihu. Then you look in Proverbs 31, verse 4 through 5, emphasizing that very fact. It's not for kings, O Lemuel. It's not for kings to drink wine, nor princes strong drink, lest they drink, forget the law, pervert judgment of any of the afflicted. Judge, I didn't know what I was doing. I was drunk. I'm not responsible. Who took the drink, Jack? Well, I did, but I'm not. Yeah, you was responsible whenever you were so foolish as to take that substance, whether it's alcohol or some other drug, that is going to diminish your ability to know to do right and wrong. You look at that in this text so clearly. I mean, how could anybody be so ungodly as to want to bring their wife, their queen, before this group of drunken brawlers? A man who himself is afflicted by that marvelous beverage. Book of 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter and verse 11, the writer says, abstain from the fleshly lusts at war against the soul. You cannot read about what alcohol does in the Bible. You cannot read about what alcohol does in society. You can't listen to the songs about alcohol and what it does as it parrots what real life is like with alcohol and say that's not a fleshly lust at wars against the soul. That is, unless, of course, got to have my drink. Just a little side note. People say, I don't drink enough to affect me. Now, how much do you drink? Well, I just have one drink to take the edge off. Didn't you just say it didn't affect you? Fact is, people drink one drink because they know it affects them. God says abstain from such foolishness in your life. And then you find about submission. There's a lot in the world about submission. You know, you find that we are to submit within the home. There is a role of male and female. And God says in the home, and I know this is unpopular. You know, in Ephesians, the 5th chapter, wives, you submit unto your husbands as unto the Lord. In other words, there has to be a hierarchy. Everybody understands that. God says, here's the hierarchy in the home. Now, he gives reasons for it through there, but the fact is, God said it, and that ought to settle it in the mind of any who wants to be a Christian. But the woman is to be in subjection under her husband. And so you got this man goes about, and he says, you know, Jack, I got a problem. My wife won't submit to me. I tell her over and over, submit, submit, submit. And I look at him like, are you really that dense? You look and you find here, this is, in chapter 1, is the idea of submission that a lot of people have. The advisors to the king says, you know, you got to do something to Vashti. Otherwise, women around the whole province, they're going to get the idea that they have the right to say no. So you make an example of her so that others, whenever they hear that, they're going to do whatever their husband said. Is that what God talks about? Think about submission to him. You think God could force you and I into submission? If you're saying, yeah, no, he couldn't. You cannot force submission. Submission is I get to the point that I surrender. Somebody says, well, I've seen a wrestling match and they submit. Yeah, they're getting the point. Says, I can't do this. And they choose to submit. But you get over into the spiritual realm, we're to obey God. I mean, that's throughout the scriptures. That's what happened in the garden. What happened to Eve? Eve didn't submit unto God. God says, you can eat of any tree in the garden, you take care of these things, but you don't eat of that tree that's in the midst of the garden. She didn't submit. What was her problem? The devil came and he convinced her she didn't have to listen to God. Oh, he'd given her everything, but she got in her head she could be like God. I don't have to listen to you. I'll do what I want. Did God force them? No, but he gave them every reason to do what was right. And whenever they realized what they'd done, they hid themselves. I mean, you know, they knew what they'd done. God, you look and you find that God so loved the world. I mentioned a moment ago, Genesis 3:15, God says, I will bring forth from the woman after Adam and Eve both committed this terrible sin of rejecting God. God didn't give up. He said, okay, from the seed of woman, there's going to come this one who will deliver the death blow to the serpent. God's going to win. In the book of Matthew, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, made under the law. You look and you find God now sends forth his son. What is that? That's a manifestation of love you cannot imagine. John 3:16, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. 1 John 4 and verse 19, we love him because he first loved us. You see, whenever I look and I realize the depth of God's love, the breadth of it, I can't write this. If the ink were an ocean, that wouldn't be enough ink to write the love of God as we sing. But I stand in awe of that love. And I love him. I can't imagine, you know, Caleb talked about Christ being offered this morning. I cannot conceive. I read it, I weep, I can't imagine how he did that for me. How can I not love him? While I, Romans the 5th chapter, was a sinner, I was worthless. Christ died for me. I respond to that love. That's what submission is. You go over to the home. Ephesians the 5th chapter. The woman is submitted under her husband. Is this a man who gets drunk and says, hey, come here and show everybody what you look like? No, it's the man who loves her, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. If there were a crowd that says, I'm going to get you a wife and I'm going to see her beauty, he's going to stand up and say, you're going to have to come through me first. Christ gave his life for the church of which I'm part. I'll give my life for her. You will not treat my wife like that. He loves her as he does his own body. He nourishes, he cherishes. He doesn't say, you better listen to me, woman. He says, love me. I'm following God. I wouldn't lead you in a way that's wrong. I might make mistakes, but you know what? I love you. We can talk. We can discourse these things. But ultimately, I'll make decisions, and, you know, I know you love me because you know who I am, what I am. And she submits. She's not going to do ungodly things. I've heard people say, well, you know, if my husband wants to go to the bar, I'm going to go with him. Vashti didn't understand that. And I pray to God nobody would seriously say that and think they had a premise of being a godly wife by joining in ungodly activities with her husband. You don't do that. When you put submission in any realm you want. 1 Peter 5. The elders. Peter said, don't lord it over the flock. There's a command, Hebrews the 13th chapter. You obey them that have the rule over you. Why do you do that? 1 Peter 5, elders would be examples of the flock. Hebrew writer says, whose faith follow. You see, submission gets a bad rap today, but it's not. If we're being who we should be towards each other, we realize God's laws, we realize the hierarchy that he sets forth. I'm always under Christ. And if I'm under Christ, my wife ought to see me as one who is striving to live that godly life. I'm going to fail every once in a while. But my wife is there as that corresponding part to help me through. What an amazing life it would be if everybody knew what submission was versus oppression. But then, the last one, stand for right, no matter what the cost. You know, you think about, like we began with, morality, right, wrong. It doesn't change. God said it. It doesn't, you know, it's not different for our time, our age. God's word is going to last to the end of time. I looked at it, and I have the courage, Acts the 17th chapter, verse 11, to see whether Jack's telling the truth or not. And if not, you're going to come up and say, you know, you said a lot of things, but that's not in the Bible. Come to me and tell me. But whenever we find out that it is the truth, then I examine myself, 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 4, or verse 5, whether I be in the faith. I have the courage to look and to try each situation with that word which is preached from this pulpit, which is given in classes, which is taught in your homes, that comes from the Word of God. And I prove all things. I hold fast to that which is good. And I abstain from every form of evil. That's true until the world ends. And it takes courage to stand for that. Vashti gave up her crown. We don't know what else happened to her. But I know she gave up what everybody else, every other woman in that province probably was looking, oh, I wish I had that. She was probably thinking in her heart, no, you don't. Not under these circumstances. You do not, no matter what the cost, give up on standing for right. You say, well, do you realize what it's going to cost me? It's going to cost me my friends. I'm going to tell you what, if you got friends that you have to do wrong to keep, you got a weird idea of what a friend is. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, evil companionship corrupts. In other words, I can choose to be around them. I can soar with the eagles or I can flop with the turkeys. It's my choice, my life. But I hope that we all determine to soar, to be better, that we stand for the right. People say, it's going to cost me this, it's going to cost me that. Matthew 16, verse 26. This is based on the fact that you believe in God. You believe this life's going to end. And like the Hebrew writer says, we're going to be judged. So if that's true, Hebrews 9 and verse 27, what is it going to profit if I gain the whole world and yet lose my own soul? That's a question Jesus asked in Matthew 16, verse 26. If you were to ask people such as Daniel, the 6th chapter, the king made a decree, nobody is to pray at this time unto anybody but me. Daniel knew in Daniel the 6th chapter in verse 10, this law had been signed. He opened his windows as he had done aforetime. In other words, right was right, wrong was wrong. He didn't change. He stood for right. And he knew when he did that he was going to be ultimately thrown into the lion's den. He's willing to give up his life. Drop back to Daniel 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Whenever they were charged to deny their God, to follow that way which is wrong, they said, basically what they said, we don't have to think about that. Whether our God saves us from the fiery furnace or not, we're not going to do what you want. They're willing to give up their life. Paul in Acts 21, he was warned, if you go into Jerusalem, Agabus came and he bound a girdle around and he said, if you go into Jerusalem, you're going to be bound. And Paul said, you misunderstand. I'm ready not only to be bound, but to die at Jerusalem for my Lord. He wasn't going to give up. Revelation 2 and verse 10, the church at Smyrna. Be thou faithful. How long, Lord? How long do I have to do this? Unto death, even if it costs your life. That's not talking about dying at a ripe old age. That says even if it costs you your life, you stay faithful and you receive a crown of life. By the way, if you want to see an example of that, go to 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter. The Apostle Paul, he says, I'm ready to be offered. Time my departure is at hand. I fought a good fight. I finished my course. I've kept the faith. Be faithful unto death. And he said, the Lord's going to give me a crown. You see, these stood for right no matter what the cost. Let me tell you something. If you cannot do that which is right, you need to have something to live for. I mean, if we're so easily swayed, it's because nothing matters. It's like that old thing. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. But the reality is, I have to have something in my life that is worth standing for, worth dying for. And the fact is, you can't do that unless you start with God. There's nothing in this world that is worth that. There's no worldly leader, there's no person that I love so much that's going to be worth it. But if I look to God and I determined I'm going to start right. You see, I can't live right and I can't die right if I don't start right. Romans the 6th chapter, the apostle there addressed the problem of those who said, we'll just continue in sin. God's grace is going to cover it. And he reminded them what they'd done. He said, no, you're not. So many of you has been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. You've been baptized into his death. That old man of sin was put to death. You rose to walk in the newness of life. He said, you forgot who you were. Don't go there. Remember what you did, who you became. But tonight, if you haven't become that, let me ask you, what are you standing for? What's your basis of right and wrong? If it's self, why not change to go along and get along? If it's some church that adapts to the culture, why not go along to get along? If it's your friends change. But if it's God, He doesn't change. He's there. He is the one who promised in Hebrews, the 6th chapter, that gives you a hope that's an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast. You can hold on to it throughout your life. You begin, as Romans 6 depicts, being baptized into Christ, old man of sins put to death. You rise to walk in the newness of life, and you walk that walk holding on to that hope, Hebrews 6 and verse 19, which God, who cannot lie, gives. And it is He that one day will stand before, and He'll say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. If I've learned the lesson, if I've determined to live the life. Vashti stands out in so many ways. But the way I always look at her and I gain such strength from is this woman did right no matter what the cost. And I consider what at times I'm tempted to give up on. Because if I do that, why don't we just stand with God? We can help you to do that. Let's do it tonight as we stand and sing the song of invitation.